want to start by just re-emphasizing to the citizens of Evansville what the intent of the Smart City project is, and it's really designed to modernize the water meter infrastructure throughout the city so we can provide customers and the utility with real-time data on water usage. And I think it's important to know, we know we've caused some stress and we certainly regret the tone of the letter that went out. But please understand, the city will not, repeat, will not turn off water to customers who receive one of these letters. We're unhappy with, I'm unhappy with the tone, but we want the city to work with the customers, and we will work with customers to complete this huge project. To date, about 30,000 of the 65,000 or so meters have been touched, meaning that the meter has either been inspected, replaced, or retrofitted. And out of those 30,000, about 1,000 were identified as having problems, and those were the customers that received a letter indicating a repair was needed to be made before the meter could be worked on. As we continue the modernization process, we recognize that some changes will occur. The city will do a thorough evaluation of the 1,000 properties that received the letters and those other properties that will be identified in the future. If there is a material leak, it's an issue that must be resolved as soon as possible, because it tells us that the homeowner or the city is losing money due to excess water being unused. With the winter weather at our doorstep, a material leak signifies that an impending problem and a matter of when, not if, a repair is going to be needed. If there is not a leak, the city will work with the property owner to identify the repairs or retrofit the meter instead of making a full replacement at this time while we identify a long-term solution to this issue. I'm pleased that Alan Mounts, our Director of Water and Sewer Utility, is here, and he's going to give you a little deeper dive into where the process stands and what's going on from the utility perspective. Alan? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, let me say that as the director for the Evansville Water and Sewer Utility, ultimately the buck stops with me, so this is my responsibility, and I apologize for any concerns or alarms that have been generated. That was not our intent. However, it was our intent to advise property owners that we identified through the inspection process issues with their water lines, and that's what we're attempting to communicate and get clarity around. As the mayor said, this is a very large project covering almost 65,000 meters, and as you can see from the map to my left here, this is the water line area throughout the city and into the county that we service, which is roughly 65 square miles. So it's a pretty large project, pretty large area, and we're about halfway through the project, which is very, very good. In fact, I'm somewhat surprised that about 3% of those that we have touched, inspected, we found issues with. I would have expected a much larger number, especially given the challenges that we've had this past year with water main breaks that I think the public is very well aware of and escalating. In the process, we've learned that we need to get additional information. And as we've identified these issues, they range on a continuum from relatively minor repairs to we've got water coming out of a water line inside of the meter pit that needs repair, which obviously we want to be sure the homeowners are aware of that. As we attempt to help customers, we know we're going to have to go out and inspect and provide clarity, because the letter that was sent out didn't provide enough information for the customer to really understand what repairs were needed to take place. So we'll have a follow-up trip and additional personal communications with customers on the repairs that are needed. And especially as we're approaching cold weather, we're predicting sub-freezing weather this weekend. We've seen some very fragile pipes in the ground, not only with the pipes that we own, but with the pipes that belong to the customer, and you can tell that they're going to be very susceptible to freezing, and if the pipes break, it's going to be very expensive and messy for the customers to fix. To give you some idea of how we are approaching this, we have what we call cycles. These are basically billing cycles. We have 9 different groups that we send bills out to, and we're changing out in those specific areas. The diagram to my right here represents that. We have touched a lot of the older part of town. Basically southeast side, east side is a blue section here, and then we have touched this area through here, and west side we're working on right now out in the Howell area. Interestingly, when I was going through some historical documents dated back to early 1900s, 1914 to be exact, the mayor proclaimed that they were going to extend water to Howell. And so that gives you some idea of the age of the infrastructure. So if we had the infrastructure there, that also gives you some idea of the age of the houses that are there and potentially the water lines that are in the ground. So we do ask for your patience as we work through this. It's one of those few projects in the city of Evansville where virtually every household is touched. It's probably the only project in Evansville that did that. When you go through that process, unfortunately, you do find things that need to be addressed and repaired, and that's what we want to work with households to do and give them time to figure out how to do that. And again, some of them will be relatively simple, but others may be a bit more complicated. With that, it'd be a couple things I would mention to you is to help customers understand their water system, their water rights and responsibilities. In July this year, on July 3rd actually, we mailed to every household a customer rights and responsibilities brochure to help them understand anything from billing issues to also a common thought is that the water lines in the ground and everything in the meter belongs to the utility. And many are surprised to find that since it's on the individual's personal property, that it belongs to them. And that's what we're bringing to their attention. So this diagram, which I'll have for you, was included in the brochure that was handed out as well. With that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
What made these 1,000 unique compared to all the others that didn't have to get letters?
It would have to do with the nature of replacing the meter itself. So it's a judgment call by the contractor when they're looking at either a pipe is leaking or the metal has degraded to a point that it's structurally unsound to touch it. And therefore they've said we're not going to touch it because it will break if we do that. So that's probably maybe 2/3 of those fall into that category. There's another third that are smaller in nature but range from a meter lid is broken, maybe a meter nut is missing, or we've found several instances where they decide to put their landscaping over the meter, or a tree is growing around a meter, so those are things that have to be addressed.
Whenever, you know, and this was done years ago, whenever somebody bought this property, was it their responsibility to put in that city, that piece of equipment?
Mm-hmm. We, as today, any construction that takes place, we have water engineering standards and specifications that a builder follows or developer follows to put water lines into the ground as well as sewer lines, and that the homeowner is to install their water lines as well as the meter pit. The only piece of equipment in that meter pit that belongs to us that the customer pays a deposit on is the meter itself. But all the lines, the meter pit, the connections to it, and actually the line as it runs out of the meter pit, it will connect to another shutoff valve. It's called a curb stop. And you'll see that in the diagram. But the curb stop is where we turn water off and on. And so all the way, and it's basically at almost at the property owner's property line. It's real near there, all the way back to the house is the homeowner's.
So this piece of equipment, it's not in the same place as the turnoff?
The turnoff is actually in a separate spot. However, in some newer meters, there will be an additional shutoff lever, if you will, or valve that's actually in the meter pit as part of the meter line. It's not part of the water meter itself, but it's in the water line that would have been installed on newers. Going back many, many years ago, they didn't have that in place, perhaps, and so that's why we have an additional shutoff valve.
Why were they told their water would be cut off?
You know, that was probably bad judgment on our part, but probably the thinking is that would be an incentive to get the item repaired, because you know it's always a consequence if you don't do something, and so I think that was over the top. Much better to take a more cooperative approach. So that was a mistake on our part, my part, and I accept that.
What happens if I have a plumber or another expert come out to my home and they say there's no repairs needed? How do I get that through the large building?
Oh, well, I would say, as with any process, it's a communications process to say that a plumber came out to take a look at it and here's what they found. A plumber would probably write up a description of that, and then we would evaluate it. But I would say to you, our plan is to go out and re-inspect every location and evaluate the extent of what we see there so we can better communicate to a customer that, hey, you have a small problem, here's what it is, it's an easy fix, or you have a major problem. And these are perhaps some advice in when you're talking to a plumber. And we offer guidance there on selecting a plumber. We can't refer a specific plumber, but certainly you want to get multiple bids and quotes, and you want to do reference checks and make sure you understand the scope of what needs to be repaired and the extent of it. And hopefully we can provide enough information through our reinspection to help the customer understand that.
The contractors will be doing the re-inspections?
We haven't worked through that detail yet, but we will use appropriate qualified resources to do the reinspection and work with us. It'll either be members from our our meter department, or based on time objectives, we may outsource that to a contractor who is equipped to make those judgment calls on our behalf.
When do you anticipate these homeowners to start receiving these visits?
That's something we've got to work out a plan for at this point, Kayla. We've talked about the strategy and what the plan is. Now it's into the execution part of it. So we will move as quickly as possible as we can. No water has been shut off. So we're not in that situation. We have time, but of these customers, they know that there's some issue with their system at this point. We just need to help them understand better what that problem is that needs to be corrected.
These repairs that are needed at some of these homes, any idea as to a cost range, perhaps in the low end as well as the high end of what some of these could cost a customer?
I really don't know. It will vary by case to case, and that's why I suggest it to be multiple plumbers, provide bids. Also to qualify the extent of the repairs that are really needed, because a lot of times what we're looking at as a repair is just in the meter pit itself. But a plumber might say, well, I want to replace your water line all the way back to your house. Well, that's going to be very expensive as opposed to a spot repair in the pit itself. So it's really going to vary all over the place. Just as if they had a water line break today, they would go out and get estimates and bids and have the repair work done. So just be well informed whenever you decide to engage somebody to do the repairs.